And he is the sexy beast who brings political analysis whenever he comes. How about it for John Rothman?
I want to clarify what Kim just said. I have two sons, as you may know, and I always wanted a daughter. And my darling wife, we celebrated our 36th wedding anniversary yesterday.
Oh,
My
happy
darling wife
anniversary.
told me I can
That
have
is
a
very
daughter.
cool, pal.
She said I can have a daughter with my next wife.
Well, it's worth noting that what was the age? Well, just how old is how old is
De Niro's
Pacino's
79.
baby mama? He's 79.
80. He's De Niro is
Oh, I'm sorry.
89.
Yeah.
No, sorry.
No.
Pacino is 29. Let me do it again.
Wait a minute.
Pacino is 83,
If you
and his
just-
girlfriend is 29.
Okay. 83 to 29.
Yeah.
What do they talk about?
They didn't talk. They acted.
Yeah. That really is, wow. That's the power of celebrity, isn't it, John Rothman? That's just the aura.
There's only one celebrity on this broadcast, Mark, and I'd have to defer to you on that one.
I love that. Man, I'm telling you, there's not a huge pool of 29-year-olds looking for 83-year-olds. That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
But
you gotta
speaking
be
of
famous or rich, maybe.
Speaking of old white guys, let's talk about Congress for a second. The deadlock over the debt is something that I think has many layers. It looks as though there was a deal made, right? It was made over the weekend between Biden and McCarthy representing his coalition there. But the coalition isn't so coalesced, as it turns out. The hard right wasn't going to be happy with any kind of deal that had Biden's fingerprints on it at all, right? Take me through this whole thing.
Well, fundamentally, what you have is a deep division. The far right, as you just alluded to, will oppose this because it doesn't give them what they want. The far left is not happy because they didn't get what they wanted. But the real lesson here is that in the old days, if the President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives and the leaders of the opposition all agreed that the legislation is pretty much set. But there is a new provision which McCarthy insisted on in order to become Speaker, and that is that one member can challenge the Speaker and call for a new election. You may know that a congressman from Utah, a Republican, has announced he is resigning, I believe, by the end of this week. There have been conflicting stories, which means that McCarthy's margin, it will now be down to 3 votes. That's really very tight. So you have these traditional positions. Now, let me tell you what the overshadowing issue is. What happens if nothing happens? And then we have a real, in the view of many, national catastrophe. And that would affect people who receive Social Security, military pay, the whole 9 yards. So the Congress is really under the gun. If Republicans or Democrats on the extreme defeat this measure, does it mean the country is finished? The answer is, of course, no. No, not at all. But it means that our credit rating internationally will be downgraded. And if that happens, it will impact our economy, particularly the stock market. And remember that many Americans, I think the number now is about 60% of Americans have some investment in the stock market. And for those of us who have retirement income, I know in our situation with the SAG-AFTRA, they have money in the market. I know they do. It could have a huge impact. So all of these factors weigh in. The important thing is that for Joe Biden, it is a test of his leadership of his party. But more important is for Kevin McCarthy, it's a real test of whether he can hold the Republicans in line. And given his very narrow majority, it's critical for him.
The Congressional Budget Office estimates the deal will reduce deficits by $1.5 trillion over a decade, which sounds like a lot, but it's really just the federal debt, now 97% of GDP, gross domestic product, of course, will rise to around 115% in a decade instead of 119%. In other words, you see how nothing's really changing. That's what I was getting at.
Mark, that does not take into account a national catastrophe. Let's assume there's another terrorist attack. Let's assume for a minute the very worst scenario, that the drones that hit Moscow the other day, which no one is talking about, which is absolutely critical, provokes another war, a vast war that involves the Europeans. Let me tell you, anything can destabilize our economy. And in the event of a national crisis, we spend. We learned that on September the 11th. By the way, we also learned it when the economy nearly crashed in the closing days of the Bush presidency. So whatever compromises they reach, whatever they do, it's a problem. So I was sitting with a group of friends, and they said, "What would you do, John?" And I said, very simply, I would impose the penny tax, which is a conservative concept, that 1 penny out of every dollar you spend is set aside to reduce the national debt. Now, to take years, the estimate is something like 20 years to actually do anything, but it would be a start, it would be a process. But people are very resistant to doing anything. So I'm going to give you the good news is that they'll reach a compromise. The bad news is that in our lifetimes, collectively, there will not be a real reduction in the debt, nor will we see a solution. May I just say one other thing, and I know you want to move on to the presidential race. The big question is the interest on the national debt. As the interest on the debt grows, it becomes a real problem, not so much for us, but for our children and, God willing, our grandchildren. So this is another.
So this
factor.
affects Al Pacino's coming child, is what you were
And
saying.
that was my illusion, of course.
Yes, very well
glad
done.
that you caught the
Let me
implication, which means, given your relative age, Mark, and my
Yes.
relative age, we have a long time to catch up with Al Pacino.
We do. We got a little. Yes, go ahead. We got a little runway. Go
Can I
ahead, Kim.
bring this up because I was reading about this pipeline? I don't know if you guys saw this, but Senator Joe Manchin, apparently, when dealing with this debt ceiling bill, helped secure this provision in a deal that would make federal agencies approve all the remaining permits for his Mountain Valley pipeline. It's a 300-mile natural gas pipeline. Also in the deal, the project would be shielded from any litigation. Environmental groups and Democratic lawmakers not happy about this, but this is now in that bill, this Mountain View pipeline project.
Yeah, that's exactly correct, Kim.
In West Virginia.
I was going to mention it.
Yeah.
You're 100% correct. Legislation, it's sort of like watching sausage being made. It's not particularly pretty. But I do want to point out that there are those who want Joe Manchin to run for president in 2024 on a national unity ticket. This, in my view, deep sixes any shot he would have at such a candidacy. But it is part of the price we pay. The Republicans have made concessions, the Democrats have made concessions, and the one who really won in all of this was Joe Manchin.
Well, it's an abomination, though. That specific project is an abomination. That pipeline has been held up for a reason. It goes through pristine areas along watersheds, across tribal lands. There are reasons that this has been held up.
It's appalling. And the question becomes, and I ask Mark, and I'll ask Kim the same question, and I should ask the same question to myself. If I were a member of Congress, and I recognized that we have to do something about the debt ceiling, and this was a concession that had to be made in order to get the debt ceiling in place, would we vote for this bill? And I point this out because it's not cut and dried, so to speak. And you might say the Congress is going to have to put it in their pipe and smoke it, so to speak.
Well, I got it. The pipe. I hate for anything to be a drop dead, and this is kind of what you're implying, a drop dead element of whatever's crafted. But I have to say, this pipeline and a lot of the, Manchin, of course, takes more money from fossil fuel lobbyists and has more connections to the fossil fuel industry than any other member of Congress. Think about that.
He's from West Virginia. And remember, the primary industry in West Virginia was coal. And West Virginia hit tremendous poverty. When we talk about Appalachia, you're talking about West Virginia. And so there is no question that when you represent a state like that, what is the job of every representative or senator? It is to get reelected. And in order to do that, you have to serve your constituents. And so
Right.
they are voting the interests of the people who elected them rather than the interests of the country. Now, let me clarify and tell you, it will go to the Senate. But the idea was representatives might make deals, the House, because it was the people's house, but the Senate was supposed to be free of such situations. Well, look now at Lindsey Graham on the question of defense spending. I mean, it is, in a sense, depressing. May I just give you one historical anecdote? And that is that when the question of building the atomic bomb came, the members of Congress, the Democrats led by Sam Rayburn, the Republicans led by Joe Martin, made a deal. And everybody trusted each other in Congress, and they were able to pass the whole budget for the atomic bomb secretly without putting it in the budget, because the members of Congress trusted each other and they understood what national security meant. We no longer have a Congress that functions like that. And may I tell you that if, God forbid, the debt ceiling is not raised, and if continued compromises need to be made, we are going to have a crisis as great as the question of the atomic bomb, because it will affect the whole world, because we are the backbone of the world's economy.
This just from the Wall Street Journal, and then we will move on to the presidential race. The U.S. isn't the only advanced country whose politics have become polarized, but it is the only one where the division of budgetary authority between the executive and legislative branches, an annual budget cycle, and a debt ceiling offer creates so many opportunities for polarized politics to jeopardize what should be the routine matter of funding the government.
And
That's why this is the key. This is the key line, John. That's why Moody's Investor Services rates the U.S. institutional strength lower than that of any other AAA rated country. It's what you're talking about. Exactly. That's the ripple effect.
Yeah, I can't emphasize this enough. If the economy tanks, it's a national catastrophe. There is another historical example. In 2008, when the Bush administration expired, the nation was on the brink of financial collapse. Republicans and Democrats had to agree to a plan to save the economy. And they did it because they understood the implications if they didn't. And that is exactly where we are today. So there will be a critical vote in the House of Representatives tonight, and there will be a great debate by the far right of the Republican Party as to whether to challenge Speaker McCarthy. And the Democrats, particularly the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, so-called progressive wing, will now have to deal with the fact that they're supporting Joe Biden because they don't have an alternative. And even if they had an alternative, it wouldn't succeed. I'm going to be looking at what Bernie Sanders does in the Senate. But it is Jayapal, the leader of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, who has now said she will vote against the deal. Now, you know, it is interesting, Mark, when you consider that it means the far left and the far right may disagree or agree on many things, but the one thing they seem to agree on is that this is not a good bill. There won't be enough votes. It'll pass. It has to pass. The national consensus is that we have to raise the debt limit, and everyone is going to have to give a little bit. And we'll just see how the extremes respond. By the way, have you heard Donald Trump say a word yet? And the answer is no. But Ron DeSantis has, and DeSantis is poo-pooing this, not saying he's against it, but is poo-pooing it as another compromise and so forth that won't work. But I'm waiting for Donald Trump on this as well, and I have a feeling he's going to remain very quiet.
Well, he made the point that we should default, you know, when he was and that's a typical sort of
but
knee-jerk response.
Only when he was out of office.
Right.
When he was in office, that was one of the great lines of the CNN town hall.
Yeah, in which he was clear. He says, "I don't know why anyone would use the debt ceiling as a political tool, et cetera." So that's when he was in office.
Can you imagine hypocrisy in politics?
Well, he takes it to another level. But all right, now let's talk about Chris Christie. He is going to be another one who enters the presidential race. I mean, the only two candidates so far, the only two aspirants, if I can use the word, and that would be ding word, who are showing up in the polls really are DeSantis and Trump. They're the front runners. Give me the deal on Chris Christie.
Chris Christie is running because he can. He is going to concentrate on New Hampshire. He's not going to go into Iowa. He is going to do everything he can to win, or at least to deter Donald Trump from winning in New Hampshire. This is the important lesson in all of this. The Republican who wins in Iowa and New Hampshire is the Republican nominee for president by historical precedent. So for Donald Trump, he's putting all his chips on the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary. If he can win both of those, he believes, and the consensus politically is, that he would be unstoppable. Let me point out that the legal problems of Donald Trump continue to grow and multiply. I believe that sooner rather than later, there will be an indictment of Donald Trump on several different levels. Will that impact? Well, the answer is that it appears that his supporters don't give a tinker's damn, and they will vote for him no matter what. So if Donald Trump is the Republican nominee for president, I believe that he will lose the general election. It doesn't do much for the Republican Party, to be very honest with you. But for Democrats, there is a sigh of relief. And I don't know if you saw the breakdown on the analysis of the vote in Wisconsin on the Supreme Court justice, the Wisconsin Supreme Court justice. But it was fascinating because the abortion issue, the right of a woman to choose, has become so critical to a core number of voters, men and women, that the Republican Party is in deep trouble. Remember, DeSantis signed his bill with a 6-week cap in the middle of the night and doesn't talk about it. The next day he spoke at Jerry Falwell's college, Liberty University, and he didn't make a peep about what he had signed. So the Republicans are conscious of the fact that they have a problem, but their biggest problem, and Chris Christie hopes, as a former Trump ally, and remember he was an acolyte there and really defended Donald Trump down the line, that for Chris Christie, this is his shot at becoming the person who challenges Donald Trump with some credibility. One other quick note, and that is that Mike Pence is going to jump in as well. And you may note that CNN has already scheduled a town hall with Mike Pence, despite the fact that he is not yet an announced candidate.
That's wild. Yeah, that's wild. Well, Pence will not get the kind of curiosity, you get in Trump a kind of car wreck quality, and people tuning in, they want to see it. He's capable of saying anything, doing anything. Of course, they feel that.
Also want to see his people don't want to see a car wreck. They want to see a victory. They want to see, the only word I can apply to it is restoration, and that is what they are after. So again, it's two conflicting views of the future of the Republican Party and the future of the United States.
I will ding restoration. Yeah. I'll ding restoration and I'll ding acolyte, please. Yeah.
Well, I seem to be making points today.
Yes, you are. You're gathering them, sir. You're untouchable. I think you're the squad leader. Well, that's the deal then on the presidency and that side of the aisle. Give me a moment to at least check off on what's happening with the Democrats. How do you see the Democratic Party? You mentioned the hard left, or the coalition that the Democrats have also has divisions along the lines of what the GOP has. Not quite as they're not the flamethrowers that the right has, but they are divided nonetheless.
Well, let me suggest, if you take a look at the polls, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is polling at about 20% among Democratic voters. You and I believe, have both interviewed Robert Kennedy Jr. He is really running as an anti-vax candidate. That was his whole basis. The fact that he's polling at 20%, I think, has to do with his name recognition. I always remember the story when I was campaigning for Nixon in 1968 in Wisconsin, and I met a little old lady who said, I'm voting for McCarthy. And I said, what? And she said, well, I voted for old Joe before, and he's back, and I'm going to vote for him again. Of course, Joe McCarthy has been dead for years, since 1957. But there is a confusion, and Robert Kennedy Jr. represents to something that he is not. I expect Joe Biden to win overwhelmingly unless, and let's be clear, unless something happens to Joe Biden, physically, whatever. The answer then is that
you expect him to win overwhelmingly. You just said
the nomination.
Of the nomination, okay.
The nomination, and if he doesn't, Kamala Harris is next in line. And a lot of people say to me, well, she's a lightweight. She's not going anywhere. That's what they say about vice presidents. Kamala Harris has a huge base of support among minorities in the Democratic Party. And she will, if she becomes president of the United States, the last time a sitting president who had succeeded because he had been vice president was defeated for the nomination of his party was Chester Alan Arthur in 1884. If a vice president becomes president, they are virtually unassailable. And remember, Ronald Reagan tried to unseat Jerry Ford, who had been vice president and became president, and he was unsuccessful in that in 1976. So I do not discount Kamala Harris. I believe people should be looking very carefully at the Democratic Party and what they're doing. Oh, you're reaching for the Kamala Harris doll?
The Kamala Harris finger puppet is here, John, in support of your, and always. Thank you, John. I know you were one of the first people to interview me on KGO.
I was the first radio talk show that she ever appeared on. So
the first radio talk show. I can't wait to be reunited when Joe Biden buys the farm. I'll be in there.
It's an interesting speculation, but I'm glad you mentioned the Democrats because I know we got to wrap it up because you're going to have a fascinating.
We really do have a great AI conversation coming up.
I just want to be clear. Part of these divisions in politics, we are going to get a real glimpse of in the process of the vote that will take place today and later this week on raising the debt limit. We must all pay attention to it very carefully. And next week, we will have a lot to talk about, I'm sure. But
so you think, John, you think there are tea leaves to read here regarding the way this vote goes down? That's your point?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I think for the Republicans and the Democrats, because remember in the Congress, there's something called a whip on both sides. And the idea was for the whip to whip the people into line. And we will see whether McCarthy can whip his people into line. And in turn, we have to see whether the Democratic leadership, Hakeem Jeffries, who is now the leader of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, whether he can hold his people. I am waiting and watching to see that because these political tea leaves mean a lot in terms of this battle. And then when it gets to the Senate, as Kim properly mentioned, the question of Joe Manchin's little addition there, how will members of the Senate react to that? Lindsey Graham is on the warpath about potential cuts in the military, and he has become their great champion, if you want to put it that way. So I'm watching the reaction all the way around on this situation.
Never have to worry about the military in America, huh? They're always going to get their money. Right, John? Pentagon always gets their budget.
Yep. There was once a chairman of the Armed Services Committee in the House by the name of Mendel Rivers. And Mendel Rivers knew that if he went in and asked for something, by God, he got it. And I can tell you that is the case today. No one is prepared, even if you're paying $100,000 for a screwdriver.
Which is what, yeah, exactly.
Nobody really questions that or checks into that. And I'm a great defender of the military, but if you believe there is no waste in the military, I have a bridge made out of gold I'd like to sell you right here in San Francisco.
No organization, no agency wastes money in Washington like the Pentagon. It's absolutely amazing. John, what's his name? Rivers? Melville Rivers?
Mendel Rivers.
I'll ding you for that. That was very strong. John Rothmann, everyone. We'll talk next week. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.